Well, tonight we are in Genesis chapter 31. After covering two chapters a couple weeks ago, which was kind of unheard of for me on a regular basis. Last week we did something a little different, but we're back into our Old Testament study of the book of Genesis. We do have a lot to cover tonight, given the fact that chapter 31 is a long chapter. But let me bring you up to speed really quick as we get into this chapter, because to me, I want to know how old is this guy? What's going on? Where are they at? Blah, blah, blah. And so Jacob, at this point, as we start chapter 31, is about 97 years old. He has been gone from his family for 20 years. Again, when we're reading through the Old Testament, things just seem to fly by. And just not too long ago, he was with his family. He was, being deceptive, doing all that stuff. He was leaving, doing all these things. But it's been 20 years. A lot of things have happened in those 20 years. He left his family, and now 20 years later, he has his own family. And his family is made up of two wives. And not only two wives, but two of their servants are also part of the equation here. I'm not quite sure if they were like concubine status or they were just the baby makers over here, and then that was it, but they're going to help raise the rest of the kids. But from here on, or from that time on, when he got his wives, he ended up with four ladies, four women in his life. I mean, God bless that man. That is tough. As of right now, he has 11 sons. Now, he only has one daughter that is mentioned. And I say that because, again, in this time frame that he has been having these kids, we don't know if other daughters have been born, but we do know that the sons, and this is the one daughter that is mentioned, is because she will be pertinent and later on. But we know that at least he has right now 12 kids. At this point, he has 11 of the 12 that will make up the tribe or the tribes of Israel. He has no clue yet, even though he has promises, how important his sons will be in history. And so at this moment, he has 11 sons and one daughter. Right now, as we're starting this chapter, the children range from about 13 years old and younger. Joseph being the youngest of the boys. And Joseph at this time is probably about 6 years old. So let's read the first 13 verses of chapter 31 of the book of Genesis. Now Jacob heard the words of Laban's sons, saying, Jacob has taken away all that was our father's, and from what our fathers have, he has acquired all his wealth. And Jacob saw the countenance of Laban, and indeed it was not favorable towards him as before. Then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers, and to your family, and I will be with you. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to the field, to his flock. And he said to them, I see your father's countenance, that it is not favorable towards me as before. But the God of my father has been with me, and you know that with all my might I have served your father. Yet your father has deceived me and changed my wages 10 times. But God did not allow him to hurt me. If he said thus, the speckled shall be your wages, then all the flock bore speckled. And if he said thus, the streaked shall be your wages, then all the flock bore streaked. So God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. And it happened at the time when the flocks conceived that I lifted my eyes and I saw in a dream, And behold, the rams which leapt upon the flocks were speckled, or streaked, speckled, and gray spotted. Then the angel of the Lord spoke to me in a dream, saying, Jacob. And I said, Here I am. And he said, Lift up your eyes now, and see all the rams which leapt on the flocks are streaked, speckled, and gray spotted. For I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar, and where you made a vow to me. Arise, get out of this land, and return to the land of your family. Allergies are acting up. I hope that's all it is. I think that's all it is. I feel great. I feel fine. So, before Jacob headed to the land of his people to the east, again, we know that he left because he had been deceiving his father and his brother in one sense, but his mom was the one that created a lot of this stuff. But before he headed out to Haran, to where his family was there, we didn't know a lot about his work ethic. Not like Esau. When we looked at Esau, it told us that he was a hunter. He was like this man's man. And it told us that Jacob was a little soft, just a little soft. Doesn't mean that he was a sissy. Doesn't mean any of that. He just wasn't out there. He probably worked in the office, not outside. He probably did a lot of things, probably in taking care of other things, but he wasn't like his brother in that respect. Now, I'm not saying that Jacob was lazy. I don't think he was lazy. We just didn't hear that he did a lot of things outdoor. He was more of an indoor kind of guy. But ever since he has gotten to Haran, he has become quite the shepherd. He has really done a lot in these 20 years that he has been with Laban. Because Jacob went to Haran with no money, he did come with the intentions of finding a wife. And so because he had no money attached to him, even though his dad was rich, his dad didn't send him with all the camels, with all the stuff, all the gold, the dowries, if you will. And so he goes there to find a wife, and so he basically has to sell himself to Laban to be able to marry one of his daughters. Well, it's interesting because he got more than he bargained for. He wanted one, he got two, but he ended up with 4 women in his life. But you gotta know that, again, when he told Laban, I will work 7 years for Rachel, that was an amazing deal. Because normally if you didn't have the dowry and you wanted to work for this woman, for one of the daughters, it would have been a year, maybe 2 years. 7? Dude, that's a steal. And so for him to do that, and you can imagine how Rachel must have felt. 7 years, you're going to work for me? Wow. And 7 years is up, and guess what? Rachel doesn't get him, nor does he get Rachel. They get Leah. And so again, he says, I will work another 7 years so I can get her because I love her. I'll take her, but I love her. And so you could see that, again, this guy, all of a sudden, he becomes quite the worker. Now, needless to say, as we just kind of read here, that he will now be working really close to the sons of Laban. I don't know how many sons he had, but again, back in those days, you had a lot of kids because they were going to work the fields. They were going to help with whatever they needed around the farm and whatever they had. And so he is working closely to them. And from what we can gather from the end of the other chapter that we finished a couple weeks ago, Jacob grew a lot in knowing what to do with the flocks. Again, he had some superstitions there of, I'm going to take these woods and I'm going to strip them and I'm going to do this and I'm going to put them over here. And he thinks, probably these wives' tales that if you do this, they will produce all these other things. Well, we're going to know later that no, the Lord was involved in all of that stuff. And it seemed like because Jacob was who he was, and I think oftentimes he gets a bad rap because, well, he is a conniver. But he's met his match with Laban. And so now you're going, no, Laban's way worse than Jacob could ever be. And so we're almost like on Jacob's side because he's getting jacked all the way around. And he will continue to. And even we saw that at the end of the last chapter that we looked at, that as he begins to grow, that Laban comes and steals away all the profits basically. And so he just continues to work and work and work. And so he's grown quite a bit. But it was the Lord that had his hand upon all of this. Whatever he did, he prospered in it. So much so that we even saw that Laban even said that as much back in chapter 20 or 30, where he says, please stay. In verse 27, please stay, if I have found favor in your sight, for I have learned by experience that the Lord has blessed me for your sake. So everything that he is getting, he knows this son-in-law of mine, he is a really good worker, and I'm becoming rich because of that. And so things have changed in these last 6 years because he worked 14 for the two women, and then the last 6 so that he could win his wages. He wanted to go off on his own. We saw that in the last chapter, that he had a desire to leave. But in these last 6 years, as things have been growing, more money's coming in. They're becoming more and more prosperous. Jacob begins to hear more and more grumbling from his brothers-in-law. Again, that desire to leave because he had his family. Joseph is just born and he's telling his father-in-law, you need to let me go. And if the father-in-law is going, no, man, I continue to prosper because of you. But he had this desire to leave and return to his homeland. But he didn't let him go. So Jacob stayed longer than he should have. And I had the question as I'm studying this, was it wrong for him to stay longer than he should have stayed? He had this desire to go. He's getting talked into not leaving. Was it wrong for him to stay? And I thought, well, quite possibly, yes, it could be. It could be wrong. But you see, desire, because he had that desire to go back home, desire doesn't always mean that God is leading us in those desires. You see, we need to be careful because I know there's a verse that says that God will give us the desires of our heart. And I think a lot of us, man, we grab onto it as like, God will give us the desires of our heart until you realize you have a wicked heart. We have a wicked heart. And I know because if you're anything like me, I can convince myself that it's for a good reason that I have this desire. And I pray myself to convince myself, this is your will, God. And he's going, that is so selfish, Zeke. And I'm going, no, it's not, because in the end, you will be glorified. But my heart, again, if you're anything like me, you're as wicked as I am, and your desires are sometimes very selfish. And I know what we can convince ourselves, like, but it's for the glory of God. Yes, I know what you're saying, but your desire is because I want this, or I need this really, really bad. And I know that people, well, it's for my family. It's like, I was telling somebody, it's like, man, there's so many selfish desires that I had that I could have got my family in trouble because of the desires that I had. It's like years ago when we're barely making it, I really wanted a 4x4 truck. Killer 4x4 truck. And I could have done it. But that would have been a very selfish desire. And I could have said, Lord, it's for you. I'll put a sticker on it. And I'll try not to go fast. But we need to be careful because even as Christians, we have godly desires. We want them to be godly desires. But sometimes our motives are so deceptive. We deceive ourselves. And we need to be careful with that. But perhaps within those 6 years that he stayed longer than maybe he should have, Jacob, I could guarantee you, grew in ways that he would never have grown had he left earlier. In other words, if it was wrong for him to stay longer than he should have, God did not waste that time. Oftentimes when people have desires to do something, go somewhere, to act out on something, it's like if you haven't heard God tell you to move, then stay. But this desire and the opening on that side, it's like stay. The best thing you can do is stay and maybe miss out on what you could have had, but to go when you're going, I think it's time, and God's going, I needed you to wait longer because there's lessons for you to learn before you get there. And oftentimes we end up learning those lessons, but they're a little, harder to go through. But He'll allow those things. And for him, if he stayed longer than he had to, again, he probably wouldn't have had what he had, which would have been okay. He would have made it happen. But he has become very wealthy in these 6 years as well. And I'm not saying that that's why he should have stayed, because he would have made it either way. But the things that he learned in that time frame, the fact that he was getting jacked time and time again, gave him the opportunity to have patience with the man that was really hard on him. And oftentimes we're going, well, get away from that situation. There's times that God doesn't want us to get away from those situations. Because I know if you're like me, again, we want it easy. But easy is not always the best. And sometimes having somebody that is making life harder for you builds us and builds character in us that we never would have built or been able to build unless we would have or we stayed. And that's what I look at this situation. Should he have gone in chapter 30, he could have, and it would have been okay. But he didn't. And God used that to bring him to this point now. Now, what Laban's sons are saying about him, they're a complete and utter lie. It's nothing of the sort. And it wasn't that Jacob was taking advantage of or taking anything that belonged to Laban. Instead, what was happening was his wealth was increasing in proportion to the wealth of Laban's increase. Because everything he did turned to gold, basically. And every time he did something right, Laban got even richer. And every time there was more prosperity, he was getting rich, but so was Laban. But these guys are saying, no, he's taking everything from my father, and we're going to see a little later. It's like, that's not the case. The problem that these guys have is that they are full of envy. Because everything that he did was amazing. And perhaps they were just mediocre. I could almost guarantee you that Laban would never have been where he was at towards the end here if Jacob wasn't there. And we all know that envy can and will distort the truth in our lives. And we need to be careful with envy. Because envy will cause division. It will cause strife. And that is what is going on here. That as the time was drawing nearer for him to leave, that things were just changing. And he could see it and he could hear it. And I'm sure that the sons made it known to Laban how they felt about their brother-in-law. And so he tells us that the countenance of his father-in-law had now become unfavorable towards him. Not only can he hear what's being said about him, but he also saw it on the face of his father-in-law. It wasn't like before. He was being treated differently now. And so we know that perhaps the sons of Laban had poisoned their father's heart towards him. Because 6 years earlier, as I just read earlier, he had told him, hey, I have learned, I have learned that because of you being here with us, I have prospered beyond measure. I know that God is with you on this. Again, did he love his son-in-law? Maybe not, but he loved the money. He loved the prosperity. But that even changed. And now he's even looking at him. And again, this is why it's so important that we are careful that we don't poison other people with what we think. Especially as brothers and sisters, because if we're envious of someone, we might poison somebody's ear because we don't trip on them. Because we don't like how they're prospering. And I don't know what it is that when other people prosper, instead of us rejoicing with those who rejoice, we want to bring them down. And that's what's kind of happening here. And so the Lord had now spoken to him in verse 3 to tell Jacob, return to the land of your father, to your family, and I will be with you. We know that there is a desire to go back to his father. Now we know that the circumstances have gotten worse. And you almost want to go, well, of course it's time to leave because the circumstances are bad. But what he needed to hear was the voice of God before any of that. You see, oftentimes the Lord works in the same pattern to get people stirred up, to stir up the nest, to throw us out of the nest, to get us out of our comfort zone. So sometimes the desire, because of the desire, now the circumstances have changed, and then we go, let's go. But you haven't heard God, and he hasn't confirmed it. And again, sometimes he uses that pattern to get us moving, but sometimes we jump before he tells us to jump. And so let me throw this out to you before we even move on. Desires are good, but we can't always trust our desire. Circumstances are understandable, but not always indicators that God wants us to move or change. But when we hear the Lord speak, when we know that it's him, and oftentimes, again, he will confirm it in his word, if you're serious. Again, you might hear it from somebody, but more often than not, guys, we need to rely on his word. How did he speak to Jacob? I don't know exactly. But he spoke to him, and he had heard his voice 20 years earlier, so he knew the voice of God when it spoke to him. And so we need to be careful that when these things are happening, we need to know that it's God that is speaking. But what we need to understand in this circumstance and in many of our circumstances is that there's some time that has lapsed here. There's some time that has happened here. He just didn't hear, that desire or the circumstance and then bolt out. He waited until he heard the voice of the Lord. And then he moved. He understood that the Lord was speaking, and not only speaking, but now he's directing him. And I can guarantee you that the Lord had worked through the desires and through the circumstances to bring him to a place that now he could hear God's voice. He could listen to what God is saying. Again, he was probably coming home from work frustrated and upset and going, Lord, why, when, blah, 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 all that stuff. And finally he heard God's voice, that now it was time. And I love the fact that he encourages him and says, and I will be with you. I will be with you. And that was the promise to now move forward. But God had been through or with him through the desires and the circumstances. And now he has the permission to leave. And so he went and called his wives out into the field to talk to them. Now, this is very important if you're married, to make decisions to make sure that your wife or your spouse is involved in this. Normally, you only have one spouse to talk to. This guy had two to talk to. But honestly, what I'm glad about this, again, it's not the ideal. It's not what God prescribes, but he has two. He has to talk to both of them. And what I love about that and what I was glad about is that he called for both of them and not just one of them. He just didn't call Rachel and leave Leah out of it. He asked both of them. He told both of them. And he begins to tell them everything that has gone on. They understood. Again, sometimes we give Jacob a bad rap because of what he did before he left. But honestly, the things that he has been doing these last 20 years has been very honorable. And as many times as this guy has hurt him and changed his wages and did everything, we never hear him really come after him. Oh, we're going to hear it in a little bit. He's going to let him have it. But the fact of the matter is that he gave everything that was in the tank for this man. And he was a cruel taskmaster. And for the last 20 years, he gave it all. But he told them, my God has been with me and he will continue to be with me. But as he's telling them about them and saying, man, everything has changed, he says, but you know how I have with all my might served your father. And I'm sure they understood that. And your father has deceived me these 10 different times. I'm sure these girls, they're probably going, oh no, we know our dad. He's always been a deceiver and a conniver. We've grown up with that. Neither one of them could probably forget their deceptive father, especially in that whole wedding fiasco. But I love the fact that he said, but God did not allow him to hurt me. It's easy to be the victim when somebody comes after you and hurts you and hurts you and hurts you and hurts you and continues to hurt you. And it's easy to play the victim because you've been cheated, you've been deceived, you've been treated horribly. And we could have just heard from here on out how bad Laban is. We all know how bad Laban is. And yet, instead of saying, I just want to get back at him, he says, God didn't allow him to hurt me, to harm me. And it's almost like we have to look at things that way because oftentimes we really want to be the victim instead of looking at what God has been doing through this whole process. And so he begins to share with them all these things that have happened. And telling them, he says, so God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. Now, it doesn't mean that Jacob now had, or that Laban now had nothing. But in comparison to what Jacob was going to be able to have, all the wages that he had, you see, Laban and his sons, they squandered everything that they had. The daughters will say as much later on, going, yeah, we have nothing here. And just like Proverbs 23:5, paraphrasing, that these riches of Laban and his sons, they kind of took wings and flew away. And then he begins to tell us about this dream that as he is spending time with the Lord, as he is contemplating all these things, and God's already ministering to him, that in a dream the Lord shows him that he is the one that's been involved in all of this. God has protected him through all of this, and it wasn't the rods of trees that he did and put him by the water thing. It wasn't any of that superstitious stuff. God was involved in creating all these flocks. And I love that in verse 13. He says this, I am the God of Bethel. God speaking. Where you anointed the pillar and where you made a vow to me. I love the fact that God brought it up and not Jacob. That had happened 20 years ago. And God reminded him of that time that they spent together. And I think it's special for us because, again, he didn't make an altar there. He made a pillar and he anointed it. He wasn't going to worship at the altar, but this pillar was a pillar of a reminder of what God had done in his life. And it was at that time in Bethel that Jacob first heard the voice of God. He understood and he realized the presence of God in his life. And it is at that time that he became closer to God and made a vow to God. And God remembers that. Guys, understand. God remembers everything. He can't forget nothing. He remembers the time that you came to him crying. He heard your cries. He saw your tears. He will bring those things up, and you almost have to go back to certain times of these times of remembrance that God met you there, because that's what he's saying to him. I met you there. Do you remember that? I gave you promises at that time that you would go back to the land. And now is the time. I was talking to a young mom the other day, and there's, I've been ministering to her and her husband for a bit, and God has kind of answered her prayers in a certain way. And I took her back to several months ago when we were sitting down together, and I reminded her, remember when you prayed this prayer? And it's so funny because I'm studying this, right? And I brought her to that point. I said, go back to your Bethel. Go back to the time that you heard God's voice, and you didn't know how it was going to turn out. And it didn't turn out the way she thought it would turn out, but God answered her prayer nonetheless. God remembers your Bethel. Go back to those times when you're having those moments of going, Lord, are you there? It's like I could guarantee you he is, because he remembered 20 years ago that he met with Jacob. And he wants to meet with you. That it becomes memorable. Let's move on, or else I'm never going to finish this chapter. It says, then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, is there still any portion or inheritance for us in our father's house? Are we not considered strangers by him? For he has sold us and also completely consumed our money. For all these riches which God has taken from our father are really ours and our children's. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do it. Then Jacob rose and set his sons and his wives on camels, and he carried away all his livestock and all his possessions which he had gained. His acquired livestock, which he had gained in Padanaram, to go to the house of Isaac in the land of Canaan. Now Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel had stolen the household idols that were her father's. And Jacob stole away unknown to Laban the Syrian, in that he did not tell him that he intended to flee. So he fled with all that he had. He arose and crossed the river and headed towards the mountains of Gilead. Rachel and Leah, they've noticed and they've always known that their father was always a deceiver, and any potential inheritance that they might have gotten, it was already gone. And so to them, they're going, we have nothing here. He's asking them to go with him, to leave, and that's huge for them because that's all they've known, being with their father. But now they've known him for the last 20 years, and now they're trusting him to go. And so when he says, you know how I've conducted myself, they're going, yes, we know. We have been like strangers. He sold us to you. And now we're ready to go. And whatever God has told you, and I love that, whatever God has told you, do it. And what a confirmation for him. Again, he heard the voice of God, but he needed his wife. He needed his wives to be on board with him. To go. And the fact that he has his sons, and again, it's going to be a huge task for them to be moving. He has these 4 ladies, these 12 kids. I'm sure he might have some servants, but you know that he has gained some wealth because he also has camels. He has to get the big camels, like the suburban type camels, to bring everybody to like, let's go. We got to get going here, you know? And so now he has all these people, and he has all his wealth. He's not stealing anything. His wife, on the other hand, she is taking something that does not belong to her. And it's interesting because they're going, yeah, let's go. And as he's away, one of his daughters, Rachel, she goes and steals this household idols. These things that they had there. Now it's interesting because it's a 500-mile trek from Haran all the way back to his homeland where he came from. But to go to Mount Gilead, it's about 300 miles. And to be moving this young family is going to be quite a bit. And so he gets them on the move. But here she takes something that does not belong to her. Now perhaps it could be that she thought, I'm going to take these idols because my dad will use these idols to try and find us. Kind of like the superstitious part. It could be also that she herself worshiped these idols. And maybe she wanted to take them. But more than likely, she stole these idols because these idols were sometimes used as deeds for property. And because they have no inheritance coming in, because he squandered all of it, she's going, I will at least take this, that if I need anything, I know I could sell this. Or I could come back and gain property because of these things. So for whatever reason she does this, it's wrong nonetheless because she should not have done this. And she's putting herself and her family in a very precarious situation. He's away, doesn't know exactly what's going on, but they leave. In verse 22, it says, Then Laban was told on the 3rd day that Jacob had fled. Then he took his brethren with him and pursued him for 7 days. 7 days' journey. And he overtook them in the mountains of Gilead. But God had come to Laban, the Syrian, in a dream by night and said to him, Be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad. So Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the mountains, and Laban with his brethren pitched his tents, pitched in the mountains of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, What have you done, that you have stolen away unknown to me, and carried away my daughters like captives taken with the sword? Why did you flee away secretly and steal away from me and not tell me? For I might have sent you away with joy and song and timbrels and harps. And you did not allow me to kiss my sons and my daughters. Now you have done foolishly in so doing. It is in my power to do you harm. But the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, Be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad. And now you have surely gone because you greatly long for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods? Then Jacob answered and said to Laban, Because I was afraid. And I said, Perhaps you would take your daughters from me by force. with whomever you find," Jacob speaking, "with whomever you find your gods, do not let him live. In the presence of your brethren, identify what I have of yours and take it with you." For Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. And Laban went into Jacob's tent, into Leah's tent, and into the two maidens' tents, but he did not find them. Then he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's tent. Now Rachel had taken the household idols, put them in the camel's saddle, and sat on them. And Laban searched all about the tent, but did not find them. And she said to her father, "Let it not displease my lord, that I cannot rise before you. For the manner of women is with me." And he searched and did not find the household idols. And so you can see that he has a 3-day head start. It takes another 7 days, so about 10 days later, he catches up to him, which again, he's not traveling with a big old caravan. He's taking some of his people to go catch him. But he ends up catching him at a certain point. And you could almost see Laban at this point playing the victim. Why did you take my babies with you, you know? And you're going, you sold them. You sold them. And when he says, "No, but you should have told me, and what did he say? I could have sent you away with joy and song and timbrel and a harp and maybe a knife in your back, you know, maybe. Geez, why would you do this to me? I couldn't even kiss my babies goodbye." And you're going, that meant nothing to you. What you saw leaving was all the money. What was all the riches was your prosperity. Your golden cash cow was now gone. But he really comes down to the last little thing of why he really wanted to catch him. Because he went home, he's like, "Where's my gods?" And it is really sad when you have to protect your God, when your God can be stolen. That is a very sad commentary of who you were worshiping. Because he was at a point that he trusted in these things, and yet he knew that God was with Jacob. He saw the God of Jacob. He saw what God can do, but he still trusted in his little gods here, that now he's going, "Where's my gods? Oh my goodness." And so again, he's saying all these things. "Oh, poor me, you shouldn't have done that." But I love the fact that God showed up to him. It's like, you better not. You better not even hurt them, buckaroo. Because I will come after you. And I will do to you anything that you deserve, but you are not going to touch Jacob. It's almost like, don't even look at him wrong. And I love the fact that he goes, "I could do you a lot of harm, but God told me I can't." It's like, why even bring it up then, bro? And so Rachel has put them in a very bad light. But as he begins, and Jacob is now getting upset. "You're accusing me of stealing something, and I stole nothing from you." And it's interesting because he goes, "Identify what it is, find it." First person he has to check is Jacob's tent. It's like, you're probably the one. And then it's not him, it's Leah. And perhaps he thought maybe Leah, because she's still upset at me that I gave her over, you know, in marriage. And then the two tents. But he goes to Rachel's tent. And Rachel, again, now, she's a little conniver too. Because she's going, "It's that time of the month. Excuse me that I don't get up." Because she had the saddle in there and she's sitting on it. It's like, I can't. And what dad's going to say? "I don't care. Get up." He's going, "Oh, okay, whatever. It's old girl stuff." And so he just moves on. But she's lying to him. And you're going, "No, that's not good. You shouldn't have taken it in the first place." But now Jacob is put in the place of saying, if there's anyone here, kill them. Kill them in front of all of us. Take care of it. Let's move on. He says, "And Jacob was angry," again, because he found nothing, "and rebuked Laban. And Jacob answered and said to Laban, 'What is my trespass? What is my sin, that you have so hotly pursued me? Although you have searched all my things, what part of your household things have you found? Set it here before the brethren and your brethren, my brethren and your brethren, that they may judge between us both. And he's going to kind of let them have it here. These 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried. Their young and I have not miscarried their young. And I have not eaten the rams from your flock. That which was torn by beast I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it. You required it from my hand, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. There I was, in the day of the drought consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep departed from my eyes. Thus I have been in your house 20 years. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 for your flock. And you have changed my wages 10 times. Unless the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had been with me, surely you would now have sent me away empty-handed. God has seen my affliction and the labor of my hands and rebuked you last night. And so now he kind of lets them have it. And one of the scriptures that came to mind, I didn't put a bookmark there, but let me go. It's in 1 Peter. 1 Peter 2:18 to 20 says, "Servants, be submissive to your masters with all fear, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the harsh. For this is commendable if because of conscience towards God one endures grief, suffering wrongfully. For what credit is it if, when you are beaten for your fault, you take it patiently? But when you do good and suffer, if you take it patiently, this is commendable before God." That was his life for 20 years. He was a hard taskmaster. Now, he brings it to the forefront because he's being accused of being a thief. And that's a very serious charge. But now he's rebuking him and telling him, I have done all these things for you. Everything that I could have taken from you, because he could have eaten from his flock. But he said, I took none of that. I have been stellar, if you will, in my conduct with you. And you're accusing me of stealing, and you have found nothing. Now again, his wife has taken something, but he had found nothing. But what he is saying is not a lie. He is not a thief. He is not one of those types of people. He has not taken advantage of him. And then as we close up here, verse 43 says, "And Laban answered and said to Jacob, these daughters are my daughters, and these children are my children, and this flock is my flock. All that you see is mine. But what can I do this day to these daughters, or to their children whom they have bore? Now therefore, come, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me." So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. Then Jacob said to his brethren, "Gather stones." And they took stones and made a heap, and they ate there on the heap. Laban called it Gerar Sahadathah, but Jacob called it Gilead. And Laban said, "This heap is a witness between you and me this day. Therefore, its name is called Gilead." Also Mizpah, because he said, "May the Lord watch between you and me when we are absent from one another, from another. If you afflict my daughters, or if you take other wives besides my daughters, although no man is with us, see, God is witness between you and me. And Laban said to Jacob, here is this heap, and here is this pillar, which I have placed between you and me. This heap is a witness, and this pillar is a witness, that I will not pass beyond this heap to you, and you will not pass beyond this heap and this pillar to me for harm. The God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, and the God of their father judge between us. And Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac. Then Jacob offered a sacrifice on the mountain and called his brethren to eat bread. And they ate bread and stayed all night on the mountain. And early in the morning, Laban arose and kissed his sons and daughters and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned to his own place. I love that twice Jacob calls the God of Isaac the fear of God, the fearness, the fearfulness, not in a bad way, but the awesomeness of the God of his father Isaac. And he addresses him in that way. And so when Laban figures out, well, I'm not going to get anything here, he says, let's make this covenant between us. And what Laban calls it, Jagur Sahadafa. It means a heap, but it's in Arabic. And Gilead, it means a heap, but that's in Hebrew. And so that's that heap that they heaped up. And then he said, well, let's make it this other pact, this mitzvah pact. And I think a lot of us, we've heard that term, this mitzvah term, that it's like pact. And if you've gone into certain jewelry stores, especially jewelry stores, Christian jewelry stores, they have this mitzvah. And it's like this heart. And it's, you take yours, you take, mine. And until we come together, it'll match perfect, which sounds really sweet. But that's not what it actually means. This mitzvah is like, I don't trust you. I don't trust you not one bit. And God will be the witness between us. Because you're a dirty rat. You dirty rat. I don't trust you as far as I could throw you, And that's what that mitzvah means. That God will be the witness because I can't see what you're doing over there. And if you do something wrong, God will watch you and he will watch me. And that heap and that pillar, again, it's going to be there for us to remember that we can't cross over it. We can cross if we're going to go visit and say howdy, but we're not going to cross it to do each other harm. And so this whole mitzvah thing, again, I'm not saying if you have that, God bless you guys. It's still cute. It's still cute. Keep it. But the actual meaning is you just don't trust each other. So maybe you want to change it. I don't know. But you see what's going on here is that God, he had promised Jacob that one day he would return to his father. And it was 20 years later. And this is why I like looking at time and time frames, because oftentimes we don't like the time frame that God has for us. And we want things done and we want them done now. And when we say, Lord, I'm giving you everything, and I get it. We can mess up our lives for 10 years. And then we give our lives to the Lord and we're like, okay, fix it. And he's going, yeah, it's probably going to take a while before that happens. And I think that's why I share these things, because oftentimes we want God to work on our timetable, and God is not adherent to time like that. And I've shared this with you. God is never late. He's always on time, but he's never late. Or no, he's never in a hurry. I'm jacking it all up, right? God is never in a hurry, but he's always on time. Anyways. Did I get it right? Yeah. So, we need to understand that when we pray, God knows your voice. He hears your voice. He hears your cry and he hears your sigh. He understands that. And he will bring those things to remembrance. And sometimes we just got to go back to that time of saying, I just want to hear from you, God. We sang that song, I'm not here for blessings, Lord. I just want to sit here at your feet. And maybe those are the times that we just need to worship for nothing else but just worship. And God will lead us and he will guide us in his perfect timing. But if we don't spend that time with him over on this end, then how do we know exactly what he's saying? If you don't spend any time here and you want to hear from God, then you're probably going to go with your desires. And you're probably going to go with the circumstances. But you're not going to hear it here if you're not in it. Amen? Let's pray. Father in heaven, thank you so much for tonight, Lord. We pray, God, that you would just go before us and the things that we're going through, the things that we're struggling with, Lord, the things that we've been crying out to you and you seem like you're not even listening. Lord, I hope that this reminds us, Lord, that you remember 20 years ago, that quick. You know exactly what happened that day, Lord, as you showed us here. And in our lives, Lord, when we cry out to you, when we're just in a place, Lord, that we don't know what to do. Lord, just remind us of that Bethel time, Lord, when we did hear your voice, when you were faithful, Lord, that you will always be. Thank you, Lord. Thank you for always being there for us, Lord. Go before us, even as we sing this last song, Lord. Let us worship you with everything that we've got, Lord, because you're so good. In Jesus' name. Amen. Let's stand as we sing this last song. I love you guys. Kevin Lisby will be up here if you need prayer for anything. Come and get prayer with Kevin.